Dear friends, thank you for stopping by. Today is Wednesday, May the 16th. Starting today and continuing on every Wednesday, I will be reading chapters of my book, Code 6 North of the DMZ. There are 13 books in the Paul Decker series of political thrillers. My books are fiction based on fact. I do not write simply to entertain. My books touch hearts and minds, change thinking, and inspire people to act. On all other days, I will be sharing articles about politics, social issues, science, and secret government programs. I hope my work interests you and that you will tell your friends. Now, let's begin. Here is the cover to my book, and I'll be reading starting chapter 1 today and continuing on. The Committee for Human Rights estimates that at any given time, North Korea holds approximately 200,000 of its own people in a system of concentration and detention camps. In just the past 10 years, 400,000 people have died in these camps from torture, starvation, disease, and execution, an endless supply of the living to replace the dead. These reports indicate that in the same period of time, North Korea has allowed between 2 million and 2,500,000 of its people to starve to death, while its government squandered the nation's resources on weapons of aggression and luxuries for the ruling elite. North Korea's oppression and politically targeted starvation of its people collectively constitute the world's greatest ongoing atrocity, and certainly the most catastrophic anywhere on earth since the end of the Khmer Rouge regime in 1979. Here are some quotes. I shall never forget how I was roused one night by the groans of a fellow prisoner who threw himself about in his sleep, obviously having a horrible nightmare. I went to wake the poor man. Suddenly, I drew back the hand which was ready to shake him, frightened at the thing I was about to do. At that moment, I became intensely conscious of the fact that no dream, no matter how horrible, could be as bad as the reality of the camp which surrounded us, and to which I was about to recall him. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. In the internment camps, everyone had his place. The guards were trained to torture and kill. The victims came to suffer and die. That was Elie Wiesel. When I came to power, I did not want the concentration camps to become old-age pensioner homes, but an instrument of terror. Adolf Hitler. In the camp, it is the camp law. People going to their death must be deceived to the very end. Teddy Brokowski. This way for the gas, ladies and gentlemen. If you want things to remain as they are, then everything needs to change. The Leopard by Tomasi Lampedusa. Chapter 1, the DMZ, border between North and South Korea, 4 p.m. The demilitarized zone, a strip of land that ran along the 38th parallel across the Korean peninsula, served as a buffer between the North and South, was created in 1953 after the war that claimed more than 3 million dead. The Korean Wall, which stretched 149 miles from east to west, stood 16 to 26 feet high, 33 to 62 feet thick at the bottom, was dotted by gun embrasures, lookouts, and diverse military forces. Guards from the North and South Korea stood at opposite ends of the Bridge of No Return, where soldiers of one side watched soldiers of the other side watching them. Since demarcation, the DMZ had numerous cases of incidents and incursions by the North Koreans. Hundreds of soldiers on each side had been killed. Few doubted that North Korea would soon test the mettle and resolve of the Allied forces. Kim Jong-un, the latest incarnation of the Kim regime, comprised of psychopathic, sociopathic criminals who had no regard for human life, either that of its own people or its perceived enemies, now in control of a million-man army, saw much to gain and little to lose. Paul Decker looked out of the bay window past the rows of brick houses and through the parting clouds to the guards, watchtowers, concertina wire, concrete barriers, and huge warning signs that denoted the DMZ. There were massive loudspeakers mounted on several buildings that continuously delivered North Korean propaganda broadcasts directed towards the South. He had been in so many conflict zones, seen so much fighting, but he had never confronted such a level of depravity, insanity, and human despair as he had in coming to grips with the situation in North Korea. Even Saddam Hussein allowed freedom of religion and developed a modern westernized society. Muammar Gaddafi introduced free education for both sexes and universal health care. The leaders the U.S. reviled led their countries into the 21st century. The countries the U.S. backed were repressive, the Shah of Iran, Hosni Mubarak, Manuel Noriega, and other dictators. Paul had taken part in some of those coups d'etats that ushered in the reigns of those brutal men. He was determined to get it right this time, come hell or high water. Paul stepped back from the window and returned to the business at hand. The others were waiting for him. The time for reflection was over. The apartment of Mi-hai in Seoul, South Korea was rudimentary. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. No fancy appliances, just the basic necessities. Maybe South Korea had modernized, but those amenities were only available to the well-to-do. For Mi-hai, that meant no refrige, no hot water. All the other fixed furniture in the dining room, but for a table, 6 chairs, had been removed. 5 mattresses were stacked atop one another in the corner for sleeping, which was relegated to 4 hours a night. What turned the house into a home were the pictures of other North Korean men and women who had escaped from the North. There were letters pinned to each photo, a way for those who had experienced the nightmare of captivity to make sense of their new lives that were as alien to them as Earth would be to an extraterrestrial. Mi-hai kept the plates of her guests, Paul, Sang-uk, Kang-dae, Kwan-sung, and Chechen Bora Timoshenko, full of rice, pork, and vegetables. The house smelled of cooking. Chili, ginger, fermented bean paste known as doenjang, sesame seed oil, chopped onions, and red peppers. And if the ingredients blended according to plan, maybe a song or 2. Since the others had arrived 3 days before, Mi-hai had worked doubly hard to make sure the food was replenished and the coffee refilled at the first sign they were running low. Yet she kept an eye perked to the conversation and offered her experiences and opinion without hesitation. Paul, Bora, and the Korean men hovered over the table in the dining room that had been converted into a war room. Pasted on the east wall were satellite images highlighting the location, size, and capabilities of North Korea's known military forces. On the north wall was an inventory of necessary weapons, food rations, and medical supplies needed for the venture. The west wall had a list of required uniforms representing the various countries they would be entering and false IDs needed for the campaign. And most important, the south wall, which showed close-up aerial photos of the 6 internment camps. What had been an idea 3 months ago sitting in front of President Hardesty and his national security team coalesced into a concept after getting briefed by the CIA and the generals, became a real possibility with the recent information brought out by the 4 prison escapees. Now it had crystallized into a clear plan of action 3 days from implementation, and all that was left was for each team member to memorize the details, not just their part, but everyone's part, for who knew which one of them would be left at the end to finish the job. 2 Apple 21-inch ultra-high-resolution laptops were tied into Langley, Virginia, and Fort Meade, Maryland, receiving constant updates of North Korean troop movements, weather conditions, even translations of recent speeches given by Kim Jong-un to determine if there were any changes in policy or a redirection of manpower that might affect the mission. Sang-uk, Kang-dae, and Kwan-sung were on their smartphones, held in the crook of their necks so that they could continue smoking. Paul knew that they were checking the latest stories of escapees from North Korea to see if there was information that confirmed or contradicted the knowledge the 3 men had collected during their own years behind those same fences, looking for the smallest detail that might mean the success or failure of the operation they had been planning for months. While Paul and Bora ate their fill, the plates of food for the 3 Korean men remained untouched since the night before. They were more concerned that they might run out of their smelly Zong cigarettes than they would food. The non-stop smoking created a haze in the room and gave Paul a headache, but he wasn't about to tell them to stop doing something they had not been allowed to do for more than 10 years in the internment camps. He went to the bathroom to splash some cold water on his face, to wake him up and wash the burning sensation from his eyes. Refreshed, he wiped his hands and face, staring angrily at the mirror above the wash basin as he did. The image did not reflect back to him what was in his mind's eye. There were lines, bags, and grooves that betrayed him, lied to him in the fight to remain young and hold off the aging that was meant for other men. He would battle back against the onslaught of time, just as he fought other enemies, ones more formidable than the ravages of growing old. But it was not just the face that gave him away. There were too many painful experiences, too much knowledge of the depths to which man could sink, now taken to a new low by the Kim regime. And then there was the guilt of sending out men too many times to die or to kill, which had taken its toll. It seemed that the soldiers were getting younger, children really, which made him feel even more responsible. And now the scenario was about to repeat itself, except for the fact that the people he was about to lead back into a nightmare world were not only young, but except for Bora, not even soldiers. He didn't know if they could handle the death or idealistic people who hadn't had a chance to live yet, for surely there would be some who wouldn't make it back. Paul could not allow the guilt or the losses from previous missions affect one that was about to begin. He shook off those thoughts and returned to the task at hand. He looked at the team in awe of what they had overcome. The Korean men and women he temporarily shared the apartment with were so different than himself and from each other, yet Westerners had a hard time telling Orientals apart. However, in the case of those present, there were distinct differences, despite the fact they were all in their 20s. Mi-hai, which meant beauty and joy in Korean, was petite, barely 5 foot tall, maybe 90 pounds soaking wet. She was pixie cute, a face untouched by her 16 years in the camps. But her black eyes seemed to match her soul. Something resided in them that was both frightening and frightened. A soul butchered, abandoned. She walked haltingly, never wore sleeveless shirts or short pants no matter how hot it was. Paul thought there might be a house of horrors hidden under those clothes. She smiled often, but it was strained. She eschewed small talk, but was passionate about their plans. She spoke little compared to the men, and nothing about her time in captivity. There were demons inside her. Paul wanted to hug the woman and tell her everything was all right, but things weren't all right, at least not for her, and he didn't even have a clue how deep the pain went. When Paul, or one of the others, touched her arm in the most innocuous way, Mi-hai almost jumped out of her skin. Sang-uk was tall for a Korean, just a few inches short of 6 feet. He looked afraid, as if he brought with the ghost of his past. When he spoke, his eyes darted, always on the lookout for potential enemies. Whether real or imagined was known only to him and the battle going on in his head. His face and body did not bear scars like the others. Maybe he was lucky, or maybe all the scars were internal. He talked readily about what he had observed in the camp, but was reticent in regards to his own time in captivity. Kang Dae tilted to one side due to a shoulder that was badly mangled, making him look even smaller than he was. There was an intensity, an anger that boiled up from within, which hadn't had time to dissipate in the 9 months since his escape, not after 13 years in the camps. Several fingers on one hand were missing. He had, at one time, been handsome, but that had been beaten out of him. Kwang's son was blind in one eye from a kick to the head, and he was dangerously thin even after escaping nearly a year before. He could only eat small amounts of food or he would throw up. He hadn't gained an ounce of weight, but at least he hadn't lost any more. His jaw had been broken, and his lower lip did not match up, which made understanding him difficult at times. His face was a roadmap of scars that told of his journey far more than any words could. Paul considered sharing his prisoner experiences with him, but then thought better of it, realized his were in kindergarten, while theirs were at the graduate level. "All right, Bora," Now let me hear from you, Paul said. The Chechen tried to swallow a mouthful of stir-fried beef before speaking. It pissed Paul off that he had to wait on Bora, but he kept a cool head. Once more, in detail, he said, in a manner that made it clear they were running out of time. Yes, yes, just as long as you know what a pain in the ass you are. Bora swallowed, took a deep breath, let it out slowly to show his frustration at having something get in the way of him and food. We fly to Vladivostok, he said, tracing his finger along the route map, then take a ferry across Amur Bay to Primorsky Kerry. How long does the ferry take? Paul asked, lifting his eyes from the plans to make sure he was connecting with Bora. It's only 10 miles, less than 1 hour, Bora replied. Waiting for us across the bay in Primorsky will be the truck and the weapons. And we can count on General Orgronsky? Paul grilled the Chechen. This man is a field marshal of the army. He is like a god in Russia. And how about payment? Ha! The general is thrilled to be of assistance, Bora said. He realizes that the leaders of North Korea are loose cannons, and if they gain the capability of launching nuclear weapons, great damage could be done, not just to structures, but to international trade and economies. Nuclear fallout can make eastern Russia a wasteland for decades, and even old friends who no longer support the regime might become targets. He considers the weapons and the vehicle a small contribution to our cause. You know what happens if we fail, Bora, Paul posed. Yes, we are made prisoners ourselves and become members of the Walking Dead. Please don't concern yourself about that, Kang Day said, making light of the possibility. He tapped off the accumulated ash dangling from the tip of his cigarette into his cupped hand. Why is that? Paul asked. They will torture you for a day or two, then shoot you, he said with certainty. You do not need to worry about the ongoing nightmare of living in the camps. Well, now that's reassuring, Bora exclaimed, joking about something only he would find funny. Mihai tossed a heavy metal ladle into the sink, which clanged off every side of the basin before coming to a rest, wiped her hands viciously with her towel, and threw that in the sink as well. Our safety is unimportant, she reminded the others. We are 6 people, important only for what we do, not who we are. If we do not succeed, then another 40,000 people die of starvation or firing squad each year, and that is only at the camps. The world must be made aware of what is happening in North Korea. The world already knows, Paul assured. It's just that the people are focused on their own issues. No, Mihai insisted. They receive the news after it has been sanitized, whitewashed. Do you think they know prisoners throw up, then try to eat the food again like regurgitating cows? No, Paul began. Or sift through pig dung for a kernel of undigested corn? No, Paul stammered, you're right, but we don't have time to change their mindset or re-educate them. As for the others, the people of each country endure their own hardships. It's pretty difficult to convince them that someone else's problems are more important. So, buying triple-sized, extra-large pants at the specialty stores because they cannot stop eating is a hardship, Mihai said, and purchasing vehicles as big as tanks that cost $90,000 is more important than the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent people? Sang-uk, Kang Day, and Kwang's son jumped back like they were hit by electricity, trying to get as far away from Mihai as they could in the cramped apartment. We're not going to change the hearts and minds of other people, Paul said. We can only depend on each other, and we can't get ahead of ourselves. We need to focus on the narrow mission parameters. That is not enough, Mihai said in a shaky voice. We can do more. We, overcome with emotion, she struggled with the complexity of the English language. Kang Day stopped checking his smartphone, stabbed out his cigarette, and stepped forward. We must destroy the camps and the factories where living skeletons are tied to the machines 18 hours a day, then end the reign of the Kims. He looked at Paul and Bora as if they had been living in some gated community, listening only to government-approved broadcasts. Once we're in, we'll see what we can do, Paul retorted, but I can't promise that. There's the small matter of 1.3 million North Korean troops. We cannot allow anything to stand in our way. This is a monstrous evil that must be destroyed, Mihai insisted. Da, Bora agreed. This is bad, but there has been worse. Where? Biafra, Cambodia, Paul suggested. In my country, my friend, Bora assured, licking the soy sauce off his fingers he used to pick up a piece of beef that had eluded his chopsticks. In 1944, the entire population of Chechnya was deported after rebelling against Soviet rule. Those not deemed fit for transport were liquidated on the spot. The remainder died in Siberia. 500,000 perished, over half the total Chechen population. All traces of them in the city, including books and graveyards, were destroyed by the NKVD troops. In 1957, the Chechens were allowed to return, Bora went on. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Chechnya declared its independence once more. Boris Yeltsin, then Vladimir Putin, sent Russian forces against Chechnya. The scale of the devastation caused many comparisons with Hiroshima and other cities leveled by bombing during World War II. 300,000 were killed. The United Nations declared Grozny the most destroyed city on earth. You're right, Paul said defensively, a hand held up, palm out. Didn't mean to dismiss the suffering your people endured. I lost many good friends and family members in those wars, Boris said, wagging an accusatory finger. What I'm saying is that there will always be such men in the world. Our battle does not end with the Kims. We must be vigilant. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, Bora quoted George Santayana. But enough reminiscing. What are you bringing to the table, Paul Decker? I am Code 6, Paul replied in a hushed voice. My government is not sanctioning this action. If we get our tits in a ringer, we're on our own. No negotiation for our release, no prisoner exchange program. Oh, now that is a good plan, Bora chided. Paul glared. If you've got a better one, speak now or forever hold your peace. Me? Bora asked, tapping his chin with a finger. Let's see. 1. We fly in, get captured and become prisoners. 2. We capture the first camp. North Korean High Command learns of our actions, thinks we are part of an all-out invasion, declares war on South Korea, and 5 million people die in the missile bombardment and infantry attack. 3. We liberate all 6 camps before Kim Jong-un learns what is happening, and we get a ticker tape parade in New York City. That's very good, Paul said. Yes, it is very important to maintain a sense of humor when your odds of success are in the single digits. Bora touched lightly on a topic too real to linger upon. I'd have to agree with you there, Paul replied. And you, Paul Decker, what happens to you if we make it back alive? I was thinking about reuniting with my kids, maybe try to bring the family back together. When the conversation turned personal between Paul and Bora, the Koreans gave them space and took the opportunity to go about their business. For Mi Hai, that was tending to the pots on the stove. For Kang Dae, Kwang Sun, and Sang Uk, it meant puffing on the cigarettes as if in a race to see who would be left standing at the end. We will pick up next Wednesday from there. Please check out my website each day for new articles on politics and social and scientific issues. And check. You can use the link showing to see all my articles and books. Thank you very much.